lives. That's right, and today we are going to be doing an album ranking for the final band I have to do here in the Big Four, that being Slayer. That's right, Slayer. You know, one of the most influential thrash metal bands in existence, And if you go to a concert, naturally, especially if you go to a Slayer concert, you're going to hear some drunk guy yell, Slayer! You know what I mean? That's usually how it goes, because Slayer concerts are insane. Anyways, let's get right into it. We got 12 studio albums that we're going to rank. That's right. Final band I gotta do here in the Big Four. Let's get on with it. Coming in at number 12. Obviously, a lot of people would put this in last place. Rightfully so, I can see why. Obviously, Diabolus and Musica, they came out in 1998. Slayer's attempt at trying to be nu metal. Don't get me wrong, there's still some thrashy moments on here, like the opening track, Bitter Peace, is an excellent track. Scrum's a great track. Everything else on here, it's pretty damn forgettable. Not one of my favorite Slayer albums. Even Kerry King don't like the album, and Kerry King has admitted he was uninspired when they were making this album. Yeah, just not a very good Slayer album. Coming in at number 11, I went with Undisputed Attitude. Yes, technically I didn't have to add this because technically it's not a studio album of all new tracks. This is pretty much all punk covers. Can't Stand You and Gemini are the only original tracks on here, which Can't Stand You was written by Jeff Hanneman for his punk side project. I think Damn was also. So maybe there's 3, okay? Yeah, it is what it is. I honestly think Can't Stand You and Gemini are the best tracks on here. Violent Pacification's a pretty damn cool cover, which was originally done by DRI. So yeah, coming in at number 11, Undisputed Attitude. It is what it is. Coming in at number 10, we got the 2015 final album by Slayer, Repentless. Overall, it's not a bad album. At this point, you could pretty much call it the Kerry King solo project, because that is what it is. The only track on here written by Jeff Hanneman was Piano Wire, which is actually a really good track. And of course, the title track, Repentless, is great, Take Control's a great track. It does have its moments. However, I do think half of the album is pretty boring. Don't get me wrong, it's great having Gary Holt aboard to take over the guitar duties. You can kind of hear him on here in a few tracks, but for the most part, it's pretty much, typical Slayer. And it looks like it will be the final Slayer album. Okay, coming in at number 9. I went with Christ Illusion. Came out in 2006. And this right here would be the return of Dave Lombardo. And you get a little bit of blast beats on here, especially on the track Supremist. I remember at the time Cult was the very first track released as a single. It's an alright track. Jihad was a pretty controversial track. I would say my favorite track on here is easily Eyes of the Insane. Excellent track. But it comes in at number 9. Not a big fan of Tom Araya's vocals on this album. Too much just yelling. You know what I mean? Coming in at number 8, we got the 2009 album, World Painted Blood. Honestly, I think this is an underrated album. It gets a lot of hate. I don't really know why, because this album, to me, harkens more back to the classic Slayer sound, especially on albums like, South of Heaven, Seasons in the Abyss, for the most part. I mean, Beauty Through Order is a great track that kind of is a throwback to, South of Heaven. Hate Worldwide's just blazing fast, like something off of Rain and Blood. What else do you got on here? Human Strain's a great track. Psychopathy Red is a freaking excellent track. Because Psychopathic Red to me is a throwback to definitely like a Rain and Blood type of track too. And it was the very first single released off this album at the time. Underrated, man. I think people should give it another chance. And obviously the title track, World Painted Blood, is excellent. Yeah, I do like World Painted Blood. I think it's pretty underrated. But coming in at number 7 now, we got the 2001 album, God Hates Us All. And yes, this is still the original version I bought way back when it came out. I had this on pre-order at the time. And obviously it came out on September 11th of 2001, which was one of the saddest, darkest days in the history of our country. And I remember buying this and getting this weird feeling when I bought this because of what just happened, and the ironic title of God Hates Us All. Now, obviously, Slayer didn't plan this to be the title, or you know what I mean. But man, it's just weird. Now, this album was originally supposed to come out in June of 2001, but was pushed back till September 11th, and I will say it was definitely a surreal day the day I bought this and was listening to it in my car on the way home, because that day was just overall a very dark day for all of us. But anyways, track-wise, this is definitely Slayer's most explicit album. Payback. Just full of profanity. But I like it, and it's fast. Here Comes the Pain. Actually, Here Comes the Pain was actually supposed to be used for Brock Lesnar, believe it or not. That was going to be his theme music on WWE for when he comes to the ring, You got other tracks on here like Warzone that are brutal. Obviously, Disciple and God Sent Death, which are the two best tracks on here. Exile's a great track. Bloodline, more mid-paced, and what's probably... Yeah, Bloodline would have been the first track they released off this album as a single. And actually, I think it came out... It was on a movie soundtrack, I think, but I can't remember which movie it was on. But Bloodline first emerged in 2000, actually, yeah. But yeah, last album with Paul Bostiff on drums until he would come back for Repentless, But yeah, I think it's a great album. A bit controversial, but great. But it's Slayer. You expect controversy. Up next now, number 6 might shock some people or be very debatable, because I actually do like this album. And I gotta be honest, the next few here were pretty tough to rank, but I went with South of Heaven. Don't get me wrong, it's a great album. A lot of people would put this at number 1, or maybe number 2 or number 3. I got it at number 6. There's just a couple albums I like a tad better. Obviously, on this album, they slowed it down a bit, And a lot of the diehard, Rain and Blood fans were pissed about it, So yeah, Slayer at the time got put in that group of sellouts, you know, when they put out South of Heaven. It's a great album, though. Silent Scream's a ripping track. The opening track, obviously, the title track, South of Heaven, had some very iconic riffs and is a great live staple, you know. But then you got other tracks on here like Live Undead, Mandatory Suicide, Behind the Crooked Cross, which is one of my favorite tracks, that have great riffs and are great tracks. Then you got Ghost of War. Ghost of War being one of the deep cuts on here. I think it's probably my favorite track on here. A track that definitely harkens back to that Rain and Blood Speed type of sound. You know. Yeah, man, it's a good album. Even you get a cover of Judas Priest, Dissident Aggressor, which I gotta be honest, when I first heard South of Heaven, because I heard this before I heard Sin After Sin by Judas Priest. I honestly thought Dissident Aggressor was a Slayer track, until I heard that Judas Priest originally did it naturally. Great cover, though. Great album, but it comes in at number 6. Now we're down to the top 5. And a lot of people are going to be looking at me funny why I would put this in the top 5, but I love this freaking album. I actually reviewed this album almost 2 years ago now. It was probably my second video I did on this channel. Or it might have been the first. I can't remember now. Divine Intervention. This album gets so much hate. I don't know why. There's some good stuff on here. And this would be the first album with Paul Bostaph on drums. You know, Killing Field. What a great way to begin the album. You know, now this album to me does harken back to Rain and Blood. There's definitely faster tracks on here. You got some shorter tracks, like Sex Murder Art. You know, Ditto Head, which are, you know, short, little fast tracks. But my God, you got other great tracks on here like 213, Mind Control, SS3, Circle of Beliefs. Yeah, man. I think this is underrated. I think this is a great Slayer album. I liked it back when I got it in 94. You know, I used to have it on cassette tape. My cassette tape was red colored, which was really cool. But yeah, I like it. I don't know why it gets so much hate. I think it's Slayer's most underrated album. Alright, number 4. Now this would definitely be a lot of people's number 1. Granted, this album's definitely a huge influential album. It was the most brutal album on a major label at the time. Obviously, Rain and Blood. We all know it. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows the impact it's had on thrash metal, death metal, extreme metal in general. And yes, it was definitely the most extreme album on a major label in 1986. However, I'm not going to talk much about this because I'm going to be doing a live stream later on talking about 1986. But anyways, my number 4 is Rain and Blood. Don't get me wrong, another great album. Coming in at number 3. Now this album was my number 1 for the longest time. Yes, my number 1 for the longest time. I went with Seasons in the Abyss. It was the very first Slayer album I owned on cassette tape. Way back in, around 90, 91. Actually did a trade in school. I traded No Rest for the Wicked for Seasons in the Abyss with a friend of mine. And this album blew me away at the time. I mean, my goodness. War Ensemble. Easily, probably one of my all-time favorite Slayer tracks. Blood Red, Spirits of Black, Expendable Youth, Dead Skin Mask. Need I say more? Hollowed Point, another excellent track. Yeah. This whole album is a masterpiece. You know, it's probably, technically speaking, Kerry King's best lead guitar performance on a Slayer album. Let's put it that way. And you know, Jeff Hanneman always writes the cool riffs. But Kerry King definitely stepped it up on here. it's a great album. It could still be my number one, but I happen to like these two albums more, and I just like the Metal Blade years more because they're much more raw, you know. So my number two is Show No Mercy, the debut from 1983. Now on here, you can hear the Iron Maiden influences, the new wave of British heavy metal influences, but my goodness, it's a classic. You know, came out in 1983, obviously. Evil Has No Boundaries. It was actually the very first Slayer song I ever heard back in 1988 on a compilation cassette tape called Thrash Metal that had other bands on it like Nuclear Assault, Anthrax, Megadeth, Halloween, Death Angel, and a bunch of other bands, Sabotage. But yeah, Show No Mercy, you know, on this album, like I said, they definitely have more of that new wave of British heavy metal sound. You can definitely hear a Kill 'Em All type of vibe here. Obviously, Slayer was very influenced by the No Life Till Leather demo that Metallica put out. You can hear it here. Yeah, probably the most different of the Slayer albums because they still hadn't quite found their sound, but I love it for what it is. And obviously, my number one choice. Hell Awaits! This is a freaking classic. This album definitely influenced a lot of death metal that would come up. You know, I honestly think this is Slayer's darkest album. It's their most progressive album. You know, on here they were very influenced by Merciful Fate. Especially on tracks like At Dawn They Sleep, you know, Crypts of Eternity, you know, definitely two of the longest Slayer tracks, you know. But you got the opening track, Hell Awaits, which is just freaking awesome. With that intro, then it gets really fast and dark, you know. Kill Again, Praise of Death, Necrophiliac, Hardening the Arteries. This whole freaking album's a masterpiece. But if I want to be overly technical, I'll tell you what my true favorite Slayer album is, but it's actually an EP. So yeah, right here's my actual favorite Slayer release, Haunting the Chapel. 3 songs of absolute killer music. And this is where Slayer was redefining their sound. Came out in 1984. Chemical Warfare is my all-time favorite Slayer track. Capture of Sin, Haunting the Chapel, yes. This little EP kicks ass and is my favorite Slayer release. Well, that's it for my album ranking of Slayer. Now the Big Four is done. And you will be seeing more of this on the channel. Because I've had a few people say, man, start doing more album rankings. Start doing more album rankings. Well, guess what? Those album rankings are coming. Keep it metal, keep it real, and stay tuned for more.